Welcome. What you are about to watch is not science fiction, and it is not folklore. It is a serious investigation into one of history's most compelling unresolved questions: the mystery of the Nag Hammadi Library, the Gnostic Gospels buried in Egypt for 600 years that rewrote Christian history. Across the world, in universities, research institutes, and field excavations, serious scholars are wrestling with evidence that does not fit the accepted story. Evidence that has been documented, measured, and peer-reviewed, and that still has no satisfying conventional explanation. We are going to look at that evidence carefully, without prejudice in either direction. Not dismissing what is extraordinary, but not accepting it without scrutiny either. The truth, as always, is in the details. In December 1945, near the town of Nag Hammadi in Upper Egypt, a local farmer named Muhammad Ali al-Samman was digging in the soil near a cliff face looking for sabakh, nitrogen-rich soil used as fertilizer, when his mattock struck a sealed red pottery jar approximately 60 centimeters tall. He hesitated to open it, fearing it might contain a djinn, evil spirit. Eventually, overcoming his fear, he smashed the jar and found inside it 13 leather-bound papyrus books, wrapped in a leather cover, dry and well-preserved by the desert climate. Muhammad Ali took the books home, where his mother reportedly used some of the loose pages as tinder for the cooking fire before the significance of the books was recognized. What survived the fire was one of the most significant archaeological discoveries in the history of religion: a library of 52 Gnostic and early Christian texts in Coptic translation, sealed in the jar and buried sometime in the late 4th century CE, almost certainly by monks from a nearby Coptic Christian monastery who were hiding their library from the Bishop of Alexandria's campaign to destroy heretical texts. The library included complete or near-complete texts that had been known only from hostile descriptions in the writings of early church fathers who condemned them as heresy. The Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Philip, the Gospel of Truth, the Apocalypse of Paul, and dozens of other texts that offered a radically different picture of earliest Christianity than the one preserved in the New Testament. What the Nag Hammadi texts revealed, when they were finally translated and published, a process that took decades, due partly to scholarly and political delays, was that early Christianity was not monolithic. There was not one Christianity that spread from Jerusalem. There were many Christianities, diverse, competing, sometimes mutually hostile communities with radically different theologies, different sacred texts, and different understandings of who Jesus was and what his significance meant. The Christianity that eventually became Orthodox, the institutional church with its councils, creeds, and canonical texts, was one development among many, and it enforced its orthodoxy partly through the suppression and destruction of alternatives. The Nag Hammadi Library is the voice of those alternatives, speaking across 600 years of enforced silence. This is where our investigation begins. Stay with us, because the further we go into the evidence, the more extraordinary it becomes. The story you think you know is only the surface. Beneath it lies something far more remarkable. Let us begin. Before we go further, if you are finding this investigation compelling, please take a moment right now to like this video, drop a comment below with your thoughts, and share it with someone who loves a good historical mystery. If you are watching on YouTube, hit subscribe and tap the bell icon so you never miss a new episode. If you found us through Facebook, tap follow on our page. It takes just a few seconds, and it genuinely helps us keep making these documentaries. Now, let us get back to the investigation. Before we examine the specific evidence, we need to step back and understand the context. This case does not exist in isolation. It sits within the landscape of modern documented mysteries, and to properly evaluate what we are looking at, we need to understand the broader picture that surrounds it. Human perception is fallible. This is not an insult, it is neuroscience. The brain does not passively record reality, it actively constructs it, filling gaps with expectation, inferring causes from insufficient data, and storing memories that are reshaped by subsequent experience. Eyewitness testimony is the weakest form of courtroom evidence precisely because what people see and what actually happened frequently diverge. Sound can cause visual hallucinations. Infrasound at specific frequencies can produce feelings of dread, the sensation of a presence, and even visual disturbances. Sleep deprivation, stress, and hypoxia can generate vivid experiences indistinguishable from waking reality. All of this is relevant when evaluating modern mysteries. Many apparently anomalous experiences have prosaic explanations rooted in human neurology, temporal lobe activity, hypnagogic hallucinations, shared social expectation shaping perception. A willingness to consider these explanations is not dismissiveness, it is intellectual hygiene. The brain is capable of generating extraordinarily convincing experiences that have no external cause, and yet, the perceptual explanation has its limits. It cannot account for physical evidence, radiation burns, landing traces, electromagnetic interference on electronic equipment, or anomalous readings on calibrated instruments. When multiple independent witnesses, separated by distance, report identical details, mass hallucination strains credulity. When physical measurements corroborate subjective experience, the neurological explanation is insufficient. These are the cases that demand another look. This context matters because it tells us something important. What we are about to investigate is not an isolated curiosity. It is part of a pattern that researchers in multiple fields have been independently documenting for decades, and patterns in science demand explanation. With that foundation in place, let us now turn to the specific case at hand. Now we reach the heart of the matter. The core evidence surrounding the Nag Hammadi Library, the Gnostic Gospels buried in Egypt for 600 years that rewrote Christian history, is more extensive, more verified, and more troubling for conventional explanations than most people realize. Let us walk through it systematically, fact by fact, and allow the evidence to speak for itself. We are not going to speculate here. Every point that follows is documented in peer-reviewed publications, official archaeological records, or government archives that are publicly accessible. The question is not whether these facts are real. The question is what they mean. Consider this first extraordinary detail. The Nag Hammadi codices consist of 13 leather-bound volumes, codices containing a total of 52 texts, many of which were completely unknown before the discovery. The codices were written in Sahidic Coptic, the literary language of early Egyptian Christianity, sometime in the 4th century CE, though the original compositions they translate were written in Greek and date from the 2nd-3rd centuries CE. The physical codices are now housed in the Coptic Museum in Cairo, where they are available for scholarly study and have been the subject of an international publication project, the Coptic Gnostic Library Project, that published all texts in the 1970s-1990s. This single data point, if taken in isolation, might be set aside. Anomalies happen, instruments malfunction, researchers make mistakes, but as we continue, you will see that this is not an isolated anomaly. It is part of a consistent and documented pattern. But that is only the beginning. Researchers also discovered the Gospel of Thomas, found as the second text in the first codex, NHC Roman 2:2, is the most studied text in the Nag Hammadi Library. It consists of 114 sayings attributed to the living Jesus with no narrative frame, no birth, no ministry description, no passion and resurrection story. The sayings are introduced by the formula Jesus said and cover themes of self-knowledge, the nature of the kingdom of God, and the path to spiritual liberation through understanding. About half of the sayings have parallels in the canonical Gospels. The other half are unique to Thomas. Scholars disagree about whether Thomas preserves independent early traditions or is a 2nd century Gnostic reworking of canonical material. Now, a skeptic might propose an alternative explanation for this, and that is entirely reasonable. We should always test alternative explanations before accepting extraordinary ones. The problem is that the alternative explanations, when examined carefully, create more problems than they solve. The mystery deepens when we examine. The Gnostic worldview represented in many Nag Hammadi texts is based on a radical distinction between the supreme, transcendent God, the true divinity, unknowable and beyond description, and the creator of the material world, the demiurge, identified with the Old Testament God. The demiurge is presented as an inferior, ignorant, or even malevolent being whose creation of the material world was a mistake or a cosmic fall. Human beings contain divine sparks, pneuma or spirit, trapped in material bodies, and salvation consists of knowing gnosis, the true divine nature, recognizing one's spiritual origin, and liberating oneself from the demiurge's control. This worldview is fundamentally incompatible with mainstream Christian and Jewish theology and explains the early church's vigorous condemnation of Gnosticism. This is where the conventional account begins to strain. Each individual fact might be dismissed or minimized in isolation. But the cumulative weight of the evidence is another matter entirely. Perhaps most remarkable of all, the Gospel of Philip, NHC Roman 2:3, one of the most quoted Nag Hammadi texts in popular culture, contains the statement that Jesus used to kiss her off and on her, where the word identifying where he kissed Mary Magdalene is missing due to a lacuna, gap, in the manuscript. This passage has been widely cited in speculative literature, including the Da Vinci Code, as evidence of a sexual relationship between Jesus and Mary Magdalene. Scholars note that the passage is from a 3rd century Gnostic text, not an early historical source, and that the missing word could be mouth, cheek, forehead, or any other body part. The physical affection described, whatever its nature, is more likely to be symbolic in the Gnostic context than to be evidence of historical marriage. Researchers who have examined this evidence have described it as genuinely difficult to explain within the accepted framework. These are not fringe commentators. They are credentialed academics publishing in mainstream journals, raising questions that the field has not yet satisfactorily answered. Then there is the matter of the text's burial is generally attributed to the influence of the 39th festal letter of Athanasius, Bishop of Alexandria, written in 367 CE, which is the first surviving document to list exactly the 27 books of the New Testament as canonical and to describe all other religious texts as forbidden and to be destroyed. The letter was circulated throughout Egypt and appears to have prompted communities possessing non-canonical texts to dispose of them, some by destruction and some, apparently, by preservation in sealed jars. The nearby monastery of St. Pachomius at Pibo, which was directly subject to Athanasian authority, is the most likely source of the buried library. What makes this particularly significant is its independence from the previous points. This is not a case of one theory requiring another. These are separate lines of evidence converging on the same uncomfortable conclusion. Adding to the enigma is this finding. The publication history of the Nag Hammadi texts was delayed by a complex series of political and scholarly disputes. The discovery occurred in 1945, but most texts were not available to international scholars until the 1970s, partly due to disputes between scholars over publication rights, partly due to Egyptian government nationalizations and international political tensions, and partly due to deliberate delay by individual scholars who wanted to control access to specific texts. Elaine Pagels, whose 1979 book, The Gnostic Gospels brought the Nag Hammadi discovery to popular audiences, has described the difficulty of accessing the texts during the 1960s-70s. The complete Coptic Gnostic Library edition was not fully published until the late 1990s. Taken together, these facts form a pattern that cannot be explained by coincidence, misidentification, or methodological error. Each piece of evidence has been examined by skeptics. Each has been subjected to alternative explanations, and in each case, the alternative explanation falls short of accounting for everything that has been documented. We are left with a body of evidence that demands explanation and an accepted narrative that does not provide one. This is where serious inquiry begins. Now that we have established the evidence, we need to examine the theories that researchers have proposed to explain the Nag Hammadi Library. the Gnostic Gospels buried in Egypt for 600 years that rewrote Christian history. This is where the debate becomes most intense, because the theories reflect not just different interpretations of the same evidence, but fundamentally different assumptions about what is possible and what the past looked like. Understanding these theories is not just an academic exercise. Each one has been championed by serious researchers with genuine credentials, and each one captures something that the others miss. The truth, if it is ever established, will likely draw on elements of several. The first major explanation proposed by researchers holds that the lost Christianity theory, associated with scholars including Elaine Pagels and Karen King, holds that the Nag Hammadi texts represent authentic expressions of early Christian diversity that were marginalized and suppressed as the institutional church standardized doctrine. Under this model, Gnosticism was not a 2nd-3rd century deviation from an original Orthodox Christianity, but a parallel development from the same earliest Jesus movement, a form of Christianity that emphasized direct spiritual experience and individual salvation over institutional authority and doctrinal conformity. The suppression of Gnostic Christianity was thus a loss not just of texts, but of a genuinely different way of being Christian. This interpretation has significant academic support and is backed by substantial evidence, but it is not without problems. Critics point out that it requires assumptions that go beyond what the evidence strictly supports, and that key predictions of this theory have not been confirmed by subsequent research. It remains contested, and the contest is productive. A rival school of thought argues that the late deviation theory, the traditional Christian theological position, holds that Gnosticism was indeed a later deviation from apostolic Christianity, that the Gnostic texts were composed in the 2nd-3rd centuries by groups who mixed Christian ideas with Platonic philosophy and other non-Christian influences, producing a syncretistic religion that was genuinely different from what the apostles taught. Under this model, the early church's condemnation of Gnosticism as heresy was theologically correct, and the Nag Hammadi texts represent spiritual paths that diverged from the original Christian message rather than expressions of that message's original diversity. This theory is controversial, and deliberately so. Its proponents argue that the evidence demands an explanation outside the conventional framework. Critics counter that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and that the evidence presented, while suggestive, does not yet meet that standard. The debate continues in peer-reviewed literature. Perhaps the most unconventional theory suggests that the scholarly heresy theory, developed by Michael Williams and Karen King, among others, argues that Gnosticism, as a unified religious category, is itself a scholarly construction that misrepresents the actual diversity of the texts found. At Nag Hammadi, the texts in the library are more diverse in their theology, cosmology, and practice than the label Gnostic implies, and some texts, like the Gospel of Thomas, are not Gnostic in the technical sense at all. Under this model, the category of Gnosticism should be disaggregated into its constituent texts and groups, each analyzed on its own terms, rather than as expressions of a unified Gnostic worldview invented by modern scholars. What is striking about this debate is not me. Rely that experts disagree, that is normal and healthy in science. What is striking is the quality of the disagreement. Serious researchers, working from the same body of evidence, reaching genuinely different conclusions. That level of fundamental disagreement, when it persists over decades, is a signal that something important has not yet been understood. The question is not which of these theories is right. The question is whether any of them is right, or whether the truth is something that none of the current frameworks has yet been able to capture. The case surrounding the Nag Hammadi Library, the Gnostic Gospels buried in Egypt for 600 years that rewrote Christian history, does not rest on speculation alone. What distinguishes this investigation from pure mythology is the existence of documented, physical, verifiable evidence. material that has been examined by credentialed researchers and whose authenticity is not seriously disputed. What is disputed is its interpretation. Let us review the most significant documented evidence as objectively as possible. We are not going to cherry-pick the data that supports a preferred conclusion. We are going to lay out what exists and let you draw your own assessment. Physical evidence supporting this account includes the physical texts themselves, 52 documents in 13 codices, now in the Coptic Museum in Cairo, are the primary evidence. The radiocarbon date of the leather covers, analyzed in the 1990s, confirmed a 4th century dating consistent with the textual evidence. The cartonnage, papyrus scrap material used to stiffen the covers, includes identifiable documents from specific Egyptian administrative archives, providing corroborating dates and a geographic context, the Nag Hammadi region. The texts themselves, in their Coptic translations, provide textual evidence for the theology and practice of the groups that produced them. This evidence has been subjected to independent verification. Skeptics have examined it. Alternative explanations have been proposed and tested. The data remains. The question of what it means remains open. Investigators have documented patristic literature, the writings of early church fathers who opposed Gnosticism, provides independent corroboration for the existence of the movements represented in the Nag Hammadi Library. Irenaeus of Lyons against heresies, approximately 180 CE, Hippolytus's refutation of all heresies, Tertullian's anti-Marcionite works, and Epiphanius's Panarion all describe Gnostic groups and sometimes quote from their texts. Comparison between the patristic descriptions and the Nag Hammadi texts shows that the Church Fathers were, in the most basic factual respects, accurate in their descriptions of the groups they condemned, though their theological evaluation of those groups was hostile. This evidence has been subjected to independent verification. Skeptics have examined it. Alternative explanations have been proposed and tested. The data remains. The question of what it means remains open. On-site analysis revealed the discovery of the Gospel of Thomas manuscript at Nag Hammadi confirmed the identification of Greek fragments found at Oxyrhynchus in Egypt in 1897 and 1903 as parts of the Gospel of Thomas in its Greek original. The Oxyrhynchus fragments, p. Oxy 1, 654 and 655, predate the Nag Hammadi Coptic translation by approximately a century, confirming the text's Greek language origin and providing evidence for its circulation in Egypt. The correspondence between the Oxyrhynchus fragments and the Nag Hammadi text validates the Coptic translation and confirms Thomas's pre-4th century composition. This evidence has been subjected to independent verification. Skeptics have examined it. Alternative explanations have been proposed and tested. The data remains. The question of what it means remains open. Each individual piece of evidence might, in principle, be explained away. A single anomalous artifact might be misidentified. A single anomalous date might reflect contamination. A single anomalous eyewitness account might reflect misperception. The question is whether all of the evidence can be explained away, and whether the explanations required are more or less plausible than the evidence itself. When multiple independent lines of inquiry converge on the same conclusion, that convergence is the most powerful signal in empirical science. And that is exactly what we are seeing here. We have examined the history, the evidence, and the theories surrounding the Nag Hammadi Library, the Gnostic Gospels buried in Egypt for 600 years that rewrote Christian history. Now we need to ask the question that is sometimes overlooked in discussions of ancient mysteries. Why does this matter? What does it mean for us today? It would be easy to file this away as an interesting historical curiosity, a puzzle from a distant past with no bearing on our present lives. That would be a fundamental mistake. The questions raised by this case touch on issues that are directly relevant to who we are, where we came from, and what the human story actually looks like before the period covered by conventional history. The Nag Hammadi texts have been fully published in English translation. The Nag Hammadi Library in English, ed. James M. Robinson, 1977, multiple revised editions, and are freely available online through sources including the Gnostic Society Library. The texts have generated an academic industry of commentary, translation, and theological analysis, and have been the basis for popular works including Elaine Pagels's multiple best-selling books on Gnosticism and early Christianity. The Gospel of Thomas, in particular, has been the subject of hundreds of scholarly articles and monographs since its publication. The Nag Hammadi discovery has had significant practical effects on contemporary religious practice. Several neo-Gnostic religious communities have formed specifically to practice forms of Christianity based on the Nag Hammadi texts, including the Ecclesia Gnostica, founded in Los Angeles in 1953, before the texts were published based on available fragments, and expanded after the full publication. The discovery has also influenced the progressive Christianity movement, feminist theology, through texts that feature female divine figures and women disciples, and the broader trend towards spiritual but not religious identification that often draws on Gnostic ideas of individual spiritual authenticity over institutional religion. Furthermore, the tools available to investigate these questions are advancing rapidly. Satellite imaging, ground-penetrating radar, ancient DNA analysis, isotopic tracing, and deep-sea sonar are all providing capabilities that previous generations of researchers could only dream of. Cases that were genuinely unresolvable 10 years ago are now open to new analysis, and the findings, consistently, are expanding rather than contracting the mystery. The investigation continues. New discoveries are being made. New analyses are being published. New voices are entering the conversation from disciplines that were not previously part of the discussion. The answers, when they come, and they will not merely solve a historical puzzle. They will force a fundamental revision of assumptions that underpin our entire understanding of human history and human potential. We have now walked through the complete case of the Nag Hammadi Library, the Gnostic Gospels buried in Egypt for 600 years that rewrote Christian history from the historical record through the physical evidence, across the competing theories, and into the modern significance of what remains unresolved. What the story of Nag Hammadi ultimately reveals is not just a historical puzzle. It is a mirror. It reflects our assumptions back at us, our assumptions about what ancient people were capable of, about how knowledge is gained and lost across the centuries, and about the relationship between what we know and what we merely think we know. The evidence, presented in this documentary is real. The questions it raises are genuine. The debate among researchers is ongoing, and that is healthy. Science is not a set of conclusions. It is a process. And the process requires that we remain open to evidence that challenges what we thought we knew, however uncomfortable that challenge might be. If you came to this documentary as a skeptic, we hope the evidence gave you something to think about. If you came as a true believer, we hope the critical examination gave you a more nuanced picture. The truth, as always, lies in the evidence, not in what we want to be true. Thank you for watching. If this investigation sparked your curiosity, please help us reach more people. If you are watching on YouTube, subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new documentary. If you are watching on Facebook, tap the follow button on our page to stay connected. We publish new documentaries every week, covering the full range of historical mysteries that the mainstream has not yet adequately explained. Leave a comment telling us which case you want us to investigate next. The conversation continues. The investigation never ends.